Setting up to record, since I don't have a studio and I don't have a crew, is very, very inconvenient in a sense of like I have to carry all my equipment around. Like I have a mobile studio, right? So I have to keep the studio at home, and when I want to record, I have to bring the studio with me to wherever we're recording, set it up, record, put it all back, and then go home with it. But when you have a studio space dedicated to recording, it's always set up and ready to go. All you do is show up, press record, and leave. So before I have a studio space dedicated solely to recording, I want to make sure that I'm being as convenient and effective as possible. I think this is a solution that came out of me not being able to record this much since the 52nd episode. It's been harder to record because the pandemic happened. The reason why we could record every week is because we went to school, so like we saw each other 5 days a week basically, and recording was pretty easy because we'd meet at school, so the studio became school, right? You find a room that's empty and you record in it. Basically that's not the case anymore. So finding a studio either costs money or we are completely at the mercy of weather. So if it's nice outside, we record, but if it stops being nice, then the episode gets interrupted. So that's inconvenient. So the way I want to do it is what I'm doing right now. I'm recording a voice memo. I'm on the voice memo app recording a voice memo. What I'm thinking we do is we go back and forth via voice memos, voice notes, you could say. We start with a topic, whether it's me or AAKRIST, we say the first thing, send the voice memo. We're going to keep it short, not like this one. This one's very long, but we keep it short. We say, today I want to talk about this, or this is what's been on my mind, and this is what I've been thinking about, and I would like to have a conversation about this. And then you send your first point or your first initial thought that you've been having, or you go on a rant, and then you send it to me. But what you send to me gets uploaded, and people see the first thought that started the conversation. So basically the conversation is being had live, and every time the conversation gets updated is when a new voice note gets sent. So let's say I use this voice note as an example. I upload this somewhere on podcast platforms. I don't know what I'd do with the YouTube in this case, but it would be on the podcast platforms. You upload this, people see it, they think about it or whatever, and then next day or whenever, it could be next hour, next minute, next 12 hours, next day, next 2 days, next 3 days, when AAKRIST responds to this voice note, it gets uploaded too. But the thing is, it's connected to the previous one, right? So if you watch the previous one, you listen to it, it's in your mind. When the second one comes out, it's expanding on the first one, and we go back and forth, and like this, we're creating content and we're creating an episode. And at the end of it, if we don't end up linking and we don't want to have the conversation anymore, we compile all the single clips together. Every single clip gets compiled into one single episode, and that's an episode. In this way, we're creating an episode as we go about our day-to-day life. And whenever we have time and we want to think about something or respond to whatever was said previously, it can be done. So very convenient, and there's like a fucking lollapalooza of solutions being fixed with this, I think. So I want to try that. As a side note, because I can do that now, because that's how the conversations are being built. Before we go into AAKRIST's response, you got to keep in mind this was 2 a.m. I was just thinking of the idea and I was still making sense of it. I think every single individual clip that I send, like the first one that you just heard, should not be uploaded. I think every little exchange, like any meaningful exchange that could provide some kind of value in the conversation, in the entire conversations, because a conversation will comprise of many exchanges, and some of these exchanges can be cut individually and stand out on their own and still fit in the whole conversation. So I'm thinking, instead of just individual voice messages, it would just be an exchange of voice messages that end up adding to something that's communicating something. Just one singular one is like, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, so let's go to AAKRIST's response.
No, I really love that idea. It kind of eradicates the need for like logistical side of things, which is like arranging a day and time, right, to meet up in space, having to do the transportation, take the equipment, set it up. All of that's eliminated. And technology's, it's like at that point, it is kind of obsolete because technology is evolving so fast. Like 10 years ago, the latest phone was maybe a flip phone, 2011, and now we have literally like people are replacing cameras with their phones. I love that idea because it's so much more convenient, and you can do it from wherever. Love it. Also gives you the opportunity to like finish a thought entirely without being interrupted or like having to, or like being on the receiving end where you may be like constructing your own argument while you're listening to like immediately respond, whereas that's not required anymore because you have the time to listen to it over and over again as many times as you want and formulate a response. So yeah, it's awesome.
We're not waiting for the perfect day and perfect time in the day so we can have this conversation. We can have it while we're trying to figure it out, you know, because we can still record in person and still have video episodes where we like, you know, create a setup and record. But in the meantime, we be thinking about shit. We be thinking about the previous things that we talked about so we could just keep going back and forth. And also big inspiration is actually I was just watching an example of this right now. My mom's sending WhatsApp voice messages with like family and shit, and it's like they communicate so much better because you can hear the voice. Of course, like they don't text because they hate it, so they just keep sending voice messages back and forth. And I think I like that. I don't know, I like that because sometimes I think they're actually having the conversation, but no, they're just recording a voice message, but it sounds like they are having a conversation. If they didn't tell you they were just sending a voice message, you would have thought they were having just a regular conversation on the phone. So I like that idea a lot too.
As much as I like the idea, I get why it's so convenient to have voice notes being sent back and forth, and then you kind of clip all the clips together and call it a day. But it takes away from the authenticity and like the magic of a podcast, if that makes sense. So like, for example, if you're having like a lively debate or if you're having a conversation, the cool thing about podcasts as a listener is that you're eavesdropping into someone's conversation, basically. And I feel like it takes away from the conversation if there is no like interruptions or rebuttals. Like I'm only thinking about it like, let's say AAKRIST sends you a 5-minute long point or argument, and a minute and 15 seconds in, he makes a point that you might disagree with. You have to wait out that other 4 minutes and whatever seconds to bring up you'd have to wait until he finishes his entire voice clip in order to respond to something he said earlier in his voice clip. And unless you're going to like cut it off at that point, insert your voice clip to answer that point and then let his voice clip continue. Like, I don't know. I think that's just my take on things. I get the conveniency of it, but it takes away from the conversation. I don't know if any of that made sense, but in my brain it did. So hopefully you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think to say that it's taking away from the conversation is incomplete in description, although it's not inaccurate. I think what it's doing is changing the nature of it, because what's happening is like people still get to eavesdrop on a conversation. It's just the way, or should I say the format of the conversation is what changes. And when you said, I think the whole thing with interruptions, I think we could just call it like that format of conversations that we've been having for like the past few episodes. I guess we could call it like a reactive style or format of conversation, where if someone's making a point, if someone's reacting, of course, everyone listening to the person making the point is reacting to the point in real time. So what tends to happen is a lot of those conversations end up just being reacting to a point instead of making your own point. Or like a lot of it is very reaction based, and we end up in tangents like with the reactions we're having. So this is removing that, or to a certain extent is just stopping that from happening, which ends up creating I'm going to call it proactive conversations, where it's actually moving forward because every point is being addressed. But I think I wouldn't remove the in-person conversations. It would just be like, in the meantime, while we're setting up the in-person conversation, we can start having a conversation remotely. That's the idea behind this, because eventually me and AAKRIST, or me and you and AAKRIST, or me and you and Callum and AAKRIST, or whoever else joins in on this conversation, can end up linking at some point in time, and then we can have a in-person conversation about what we were just talking about remotely.
What Ala was saying makes sense, because it's not as organic. It's not like you're engaging, but it's not like immediate, and it's not as spontaneous. That's the downside. However, yeah, what Gio said is that you do actually get to complete the idea and move forward on the train of thought. And I think in response to what Alice said about if you disagree with something that one person said in like the middle of the clip and you have to wait like 4 minutes or whatever, I think the trick would be to keep the recordings as concise as possible. And that's what I'm kind of excited about as well, is because you're going to be not forced, but you're going to, the voice note will incline you to keep your argument concise.
I'm being forced really to listen to what is being said before then reacting, which is kind of, for me, it's better because I don't normally, like in a conversation, I don't normally do that. I get too excited and then I just like respond right away. So I think, yeah, it's definitely different. But if you're gonna do both, I think this is just like a different way to have a conversation, which I haven't seen in podcasts. So I think it's cool.
Yeah, I think the only cons is that it is a less organic conversation in the sense of it's not being had with everyone like in the same space in the same time. But other than that, it forces everyone to be more concise. It moves things forward because no one's being interrupted while they're making their point. It's funny because I think that's how like debate and those practices work, where when the person's making their point, you let them make their point and then you attack every single point they've made. I'm pretty sure that's like how classic academic or whatever debate works, and they do it for a reason. It's because it can help the conversation be productive instead of have everyone just reacting to every point that was made. So I think in the sense of getting the best of both worlds, because those conversations are also very entertaining to listen to. I think the best way to do it is what I said, where while we maybe set up the next episode before we like everyone has their schedules open to record, we could record as we've been doing for this little clip here, and when we do meet up in person, we just have the normal conversations where people can be interrupted and stuff. But I'm really excited for this format, and I'm amped to see what conversations we have with it.